Everyone, we'll wait until we've got a couple more joining up today. But just to start off with, obviously, very well welcome to everyone joining our webinar today. We are very fortunate that we've got Gillian a second time round for our webinar. I can't believe the last one actually happened about 4 months ago. It's quite scary how quickly time is going at the moment. That was before the summer period, which seems pretty crazy. But I also wanted to formally introduce myself. So I'm Elspeth and I head up the HR and talent side here at CNC Search. Please do, throughout the webinar, if you do have any questions, there is a chat box at the bottom, which I know Ed has just, Ed will be typing in, and then there is also a Q&A section. So at the end, there will be questions that you can answer, that you can ask, and obviously Gillian, I'm sure will be very happy to answer any of those. But I guess I will hand straight over to Ed to do the more formal introductions.
Thank you very much, Elspeth. Yeah, I know we've got, I think, sort of about 300 people joining today. So if you want to, just as I say, chat in, put in the chat box, should I say, where you're from and that you can hear us okay, that'd be superb. We are delighted to welcome back Gillian. So we actually had an event, as Elspeth said, earlier on in the year. Such was the reception of that event. We are hosting the second event today, and really the point of that is that we managed to cover a lot, but very surface level in the last webinar. So hopefully Gillian can take you that level below. If anyone hasn't met Gillian, the most incredible individual, an ICF master coach, no less, which I don't know how many there are, but there are not very many around the world. Gillian, I've received exec coaching from Gillian myself, and sort of been very much privy to some of her insights, which have helped me massively. Gillian does lead bigger groups for transformational coaching. She also does one-on-one exec coaching, as well as a number of other things like meditation, energy management, and a sort of whole host of other things. Gillian has also brought out her own book, which you are, I think, is it on Amazon, Gillian?
It is, yes.
We'll stick the link into the group as well. So yeah, I'd really encourage you to grab a copy of that. We are also joined by Elspeth. Elspeth is a director of CNC. Herself in her focus is HR and talent positions, so it's very, very related to her area. She's also CIPD level 5. I'm hoping that's the right one, Elspeth. So has a really good understanding of the HR profession and leadership more generally. My name is Ed Chamberlain. I founded Altus Partners, and we're an exec search business focused on private equity. And again, this really overlays into a number of the leadership roles that we personally recruit for as well. The topic itself really relates to mental health, and I think it's almost a topic that is so present in everyday life now in terms of narrative around it. But I think when we look at it, often people don't necessarily understand that it is sort of part of your general well-being, rather than this sort of topic that no one really wants to kind of get near. 1 in 4 people will experience some kind of mental health problem each year. So that's a quarter of us, which is an alarming statistic. And 1 in 2 adults aged 18 to 34 has experienced a mental health problem at some point in their life. And 3 out of 4 people with a mental health problem don't actually receive any treatment for their condition. So I think the key thing is there's huge amounts we are yet to discover, and that we can also do personally. And today's topic we're going to be focused on is resilience, which is our ability, according to the dictionary anyway, that is, our ability to withstand or recover quickly from difficult conditions. So on that note, I will pass over to you, Gillian, and we look forward to all of your insights in and around the topic.
And I'm just going to jump in very quickly. I can see a couple of people have messaged to say that the chat is unavailable, so we will get that sorted. But in the meantime, if you just don't mind typing to the Q&A section, that'd be brilliant, just whilst we get the chat set up and running.
Absolutely.
Lovely. Perfect. So you're happy for me to share the slides and crack on?
It's all over to you.
All right then. Well, welcome everybody. Hello, I'm Gillian McMichael. Really glad to be here today. I'm just going to get the slide up so we can see everything. There we go. All right. So today we are talking about unlocking your potential through rock solid resilience. So I've been a coach for 20 years. I've coached over 10,000 clients over this last 20-year period. And as I said, delighted to be here to share hopefully some inspiration and some tools and tips to help you with your resilience and how you can unlock more of your potential. So these are things that I thought we would cover off today, which is just a basic understanding of what is potential, how can we benefit from living and working more within our potential, our human needs, barriers to our success, cultivating trust, reframing for resilience, and signposting for greater potential. And then we'll talk about some next steps, some things that you can maybe take away and some tools and tips. So let's get into this. So let's think about what is potential. So human potential is the capacity for humans to improve themselves through studying, training, and practice to reach the limit of their ability to develop their aptitudes and skills. Now, we also know that potential is something that human beings always crave towards. Now, potential for me is about doing and achieving your goals, achieving your aspirations, but more than anything, living your life in a way that allows you to feel fulfilled and content with everything that you've experienced. Now, that's my personal point of view in it, but obviously, you know, through lots and lots of research, it has been proven now that only 10% of human potential is ever realized in our lifetime. Now, as a coach, I'm kind of thinking that's absolutely bonkers, because realistically, I think there's lots more opportunities for us to delve deeper into our potential and to reach more of it. But the problem is we get derailed in life. We get sidetracked, things block us and stop us from reaching that potential. And a lot of that is to do with our energy and resilience. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So let's think about potential. If we think about the human potential, or the emphasis is really around personal development. It can also be around professional development, but potential began to become popular in the 60s with the human potential movement. That's had its roots, I suppose, in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, its roots in humanistic psychology and existentialism. Now, really the purpose of this movement in the 60s was to promote the idea that humans can experience an exceptional quality of life with happiness, creativity, fulfillment when they strive to reach their potential. And I know for me, I certainly want to have that happiness, creativity, and fulfillment in my life. And I know how important it is to those of my clients as well. And I'm sure it's the same for you. And so we want to kind of figure out, well, how can we actually do that in a world that's complex? It's busy. You know, there's so much going on. There's so much pressure. Ed obviously spoke there a little bit about mental health and awareness and wellness as a whole. And we know that at the moment, our capacity is most probably near the maximum that it can be. Hence, you're experiencing people with overwhelmment, anxiety disorder, stress, and stress-related symptoms such as high blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes, and a range of other different, maybe more severe illnesses. But on the back of that as well, we're dealing with insomnia, which is huge at the moment because of the stress levels and the overwhelm, and also burnout, which is obviously on the increase and the rise. And so we really want to understand how we can manage ourselves through these challenges that we're facing, that we've always faced, but most probably feel a little bit more than we have before, just because we're out of pandemic now and we're still figuring out who we are, what we want, and where we're going after that quite tumultuous time that we had through the pandemic process and experience. So let's look at why potential is important, because what does it do for us? So when we are in our potential and when we're living our life maybe on purpose more, with more of our potential, and we're reaching that much more higher levels of self-actualization, then we are improving our physical body, meaning that we have more energy. We're improving our mind, which means we have more clarity. We improve our focus, gives us more effectiveness in the way that we do things. It improves our ability to learn, meaning that our capacity for learning increases quite significantly. And it helps us create those more harmonious relationships that really foster good, deep, long-lasting relationships, not with just others, but also with ourselves. And finally, it improves the creativity and problem-solving approaches. So we go to much more of a solution-orientated mindset rather than a problem kind of mindset. So when we think more, though, from a health perspective, we talked before around those levels of blood pressure, hypertension, cholesterol levels. If we are living and working more within our potential, where we have our levels of resilience at where they should be, then our hormones, our stress hormones reduce, so less cortisol, less adrenaline, which are not good for the body on a permanent basis. We can breathe properly, meaning that we're not this shallow breathing that most of us tend to do, really from the nose to the chest. We're not really doing that deep belly breathing. So it allows us to expand and allow the breath to do the work that it should be doing by producing oxygen to all areas of our body. It reduces our anti-aging hormone, the DHEA hormone, and it sends different messages through our neural pathways from our body to our brain, meaning that we're much more positive and we have a greater outlook on life. And it also means that we can learn to manage our mind rather than our mind managing us. Our immune function increases and our anxiety, depression, and insomnia start to decrease over time. And that's because we're much more calmer. We're in a more steady state in terms of, I suppose, in the way that we're managing ourselves, but more than anything else, we are more present in the moment. Most of us, in fact, most probably 80% of the population spend time focusing on the past and on the future. Only 20% tend to spend focusing time in the here and the now. Now, for us to be resilient, to be able to pick ourselves up when things go awry, and to be able to bounce back quickly, we need to be in the present moment instead of the past or the future, because the past is the past. There is nothing we can do about that. That's happened, that's gone. And the future, of course, it's important to set goals and to think about the future, but not to the extent of living in the future, dreaming about things and not focusing on what's happening right here, right now, because that is the only time we should be focusing on the here and the now. Now, when we think about resilience and when we find ourselves in that resilience with and because we're working more within our potential, then our worry decreases. We stop thinking about the future and worrying about the past. You know, our anger and pain, the things that we hold on to for so many years, we can start to let go of. We all have baggage. In fact, most of us carry way too much baggage than we need to. And when we're resilient, we're able to understand, what do we need to let go of? What is it that is no longer serving us well, that we can decide to choose in this moment to let go of versus to keep carrying with us throughout the rest of our lives? And that's what we're able to do when we're more in our potential and more within our space of healthy resilience. Obviously, depression, anxiety, poor sleeping, as we talked about, can disappear over time. But Maslow obviously came up with his hierarchy of needs, and this is still very true for modern day living, even though it's around in the 60s. Now, obviously, it's very important that we have these stages that we need to go through to get to our self-actualization, which is that top kind of the blue at the top of the triangle there, meaning that our desire is to be, really for me, is to become the best version of ourselves. Now, what Maslow's theory was, I'm sure you're most probably familiar with this anyway, but just as a quick overview, Maslow's theory very much was that our needs need to be met at every level. And when one need is not being met, it means that we're not able to move forward into the next level of our potential or move towards that greater potential, meaning that we need to be fulfilled in each of these levels before we can reach that self-actualization level. Now, you'll know yourself, and certainly I know from my experience in life, I'm up and down here like a yo-yo. You know, I can have obviously my physiological needs are met because I've got my water, I've got my home, I've got my air, I can sleep well and things like that. I have those, and my safety needs, you know, are often kind of met. But, you know, for those of us that might be, or even through pandemic, for example, safety needs was hugely important to us, and still most probably is in many respects. And so if our need has not been met there, then we can't feel that sense of belonging and connection. We can't have our esteem needs met in terms of that recognition, that sense of freedom and respect and status and so forth. And that means that then we can't move on to our potential. Now, you'll find as you go through your lives that you'll be up and down here. As I've said, I've been up and down like a yo-yo over the last 3 years in particular, because of my experiences through pandemic and now coming out the other side. And I'm sure we're going to continue to move forward in this way. So the key thing is to understand what needs need to be met, because with resilience, we have to have our needs met. We need to look after ourselves to make sure that we can bounce back. We can get, you know, dust ourselves off. And even in real sense of challenges of adversity, we're still able to self-regulate ourselves and move forward, able to manage our emotions and manage ourselves so we can navigate ourselves to where we need to get to. Meaning, in essence, we need to make sure that every step of the way our needs are being met, because when they're not being met, it will keep us in a holding pattern. And that's when our ego will become present and we'll find ourselves challenged with narratives, stories, blockers, you know, things that are going to stop us from achieving our levels of success. So if we think about some of those self-actualized behaviors, specifically around living and working more within your potential, I've been resilient enough to get to that point, then, you know, we will have this sense of curiosity. And we'll, you know, you'll get that kind of wonder that you might have had as a child. I don't know whether you can remember that, but that real sense of, wow, this is amazing. I'm really interested in this. And you'll be curious and wanting to try new things, and your attention will be stimulated way, way more because you've got the capacity to do that. You'll be completely open-minded to try new things. That curiosity, that openness to learning and experiential living will come through much, much more. You're going to start being more honest with yourself, and you'll be willing to risk that unpopularity if you disagree with others. You'll be more able to maybe speak your truth, own your truth, and live your truth. And that's something that I think most humans find quite difficult, because going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, in the middle block there is that sense of belonging. We all need to fit in. We all want to belong. We all want to be liked, because it's the human condition. But sometimes it means that, you know, we have to take that risk every now and again to say, well, do you know what? I don't agree with this. And this is actually what's important to me. And if you're living in that more self-actualized space, because you're resilient enough to say, actually, do you know what? I don't agree with that. It's okay to be like that. And so therefore you're going to have to take a few more risks and a few more challenges. And if you might already be experiencing this already. And if you do, then that means that you're moving more into that self-actualized space. When we think about human learning, which is not really associated to this particular topic, but most of the population is still stuck in the socialized mind. In fact, 58% of adults are stuck in a socialized mind, meaning that it is difficult for them to voice their opinion and to share their thoughts and to risk unpopularity. And only 22% are in the self-authoring mind. Now, when we reach more of our potential, we shift into self-authoring mind, which means that we don't need to fit with everything that goes on in the crowd. We don't, you know, we're not like sheep. We don't follow the crowd. We're willing to say, do you know what? I'm unique. I'm individual. And this is what I need. This is what I want. And this is where I'm going. And when we're in that space of full self-actualization, we shift from socialized mind, which is all around belonging and wanting to be liked and to fit in, into more of a self-authoring mind. And I think that's a very important leap to jump from, because as we've said, 58% of the population is stuck in not in the self-authoring mind, in the socialized mind. So we need to figure out who we are and what you want. And more than anything else, what is important to you? Not important to anybody else, important to you. We have one shot at this body in this life. And so it's important we try to make the most of it. So don't be afraid to open yourself up to new experiences and take responsibility more for your own life and your actions. And again, we can only do that when we're resilient. So what we have to do, first of all, is understand what's going on for us, understanding our blockers to our own success, because the only people that get in our way is ourselves. So when I look back over many years ago, where my resilience perhaps wasn't as high, I was the blocker in my own life. I was the person that stopped my progress. Mind you, at the time, I did blame other people, and that was my ego speaking. But when you work through that and you come through that, you realize that actually the only person that is stopping me is me. And that will be the same in everyone else's life too, because that again is the human condition. Now, what we need to understand though is what is blocking us, because once you understand what's blocking you, you can then determine how you move forward. So what is it? What need is not being met at this moment in time? Is it recognition? Is it praise? Is it belonging? Or is it the fact that we're not fulfilled enough in the work that we do, or satisfied with what we have? Do we do the right level of reflection? Do we take time to ask ourselves some fundamental questions like, who am I? What do I want? What's my purpose? Do we take time out to ask those three very soulful and very purposeful questions that will give us the opportunity and give us the answers to unlock more of our potential? Have we dealt with unresolved issues? Are we still holding on to things that happened in the past that are no longer serving us very well? How do we relate to others? Are we open? Are we receptive? Are we willing to seek first to understand before seeking to be understood? Or are we pushing our own everything onto somebody else and not really doing any listening at all? And what's going on in our communities, in society, but also in our cultural norms? That might mean around the organization that you belong to too, the culture of the organization, and what's going on within the system. Because all of that will affect us and will stop us from moving forward in that resilient way. But once we know what's stopping us, we can then move forward. It's a bit similar by asking yourself, well, what was the trigger that got me wound up in the first place? What was the trigger that got me angry or upset? Or what was the trigger that stopped me in my tracks? And triggers are very important, because if we don't understand why we feel the way that we feel, or what's happened to impact us in the way that it has, then we're not going to be able to move forward, because that self-awareness, that self-understanding and knowledge is absolutely essential to us moving further into our potential and leading a resilient life. So I'm going to ask you a quick question. I just wonder if you could just jot something down. What stops you from reaching more of your potential? What is one of your blockers? You might have more, but just take a minute just to reflect on what stops you from reaching more of your potential. I'll just give you a minute just for a second just to think about that. So I'll share with you what happens to me and what happened to me many, many years ago and has portrayed itself and showed up in my life on many occasions. Now, okay, I've been a coach for 20 years. I'm a meditation teacher, yoga teacher, Reiki healer. I've done a lot to help me on my self-development journey to becoming a better version of myself. And I'm glad I've invested in those tools, techniques, teachings, and trainings. But it doesn't stop me from being human. It doesn't stop me from being normal, like we all are at the end of the day. Now, what happens, and what certainly stops me, and this, I'm sure you'll relate to this, is that when we find our needs are not being met, When something comes from left field, when something stops us in our track, we have a choice. There is always an event, there is always a response, there is always an outcome. And that comes from Steve Canfield, if anybody's aware of that. There is that kind of philosophy that the event will always happen, the situation will always happen. But it's how we decide in that moment, how do we respond to that circumstance or situation that will then lead to an outcome, hopefully a better outcome than the one if we instead blame. Now, the problem is many, and I would say again, big population here, very generalistic speaking, but most people will blame the event for the lack of outcome and not really address how did they respond to the situation or the circumstance. Now, part of being resilient is about understanding how you respond. But instead, most of us just react. It's just that emotional roar. It's up from the stomach, out. And before we know it, we are surrounded by our drama. And this is Stephen Cartman's drama triangle. I'm sure some of you have seen this before. But within this capacity, within our human condition, within our human state, we have three ego states. We have the child, we have the parent, and more than anything else, we have the adult. Now, as we move forward, we should try as much as possible to remain in adult to adult ego state, meaning that we have adult to adult conversations with others, but we also have adult to adult conversations with ourselves. The problem is, though, is that when we're not resilient, we find ourselves falling into the drama. And when we fall into the drama, then we can find ourselves very quickly delving into being the victim mode, meaning that we're overwhelmed, we're vulnerable, we don't want to take responsibility. In fact, we want somebody to come and take that responsibility away from us and fix it and make it feel better, meaning that we're in child ego state. But the problem is with child ego state, it can very quickly move into that stroppy teenager state, which I would class as the role of the persecutor, which is someone then who likes to blame others. They might lash out, again, still not wanting to take responsibility, but are wanting to prove a point. And this is all driven by ego. And then what we're wanting is somebody to come and rescue us. But when they do rescue us, it doesn't really work out that well, because actually deep down, they're not really fixing the need that we need to have fixed. And so you might find yourselves going around and around this triangle. And before you know it, you're not quite sure why you're in this space in the first instance, because you've lost sight of why you were distressed or upset or angry in the first instance. Now, what we want to do, though, through a resilient life is understand how we can build that more resilience so that we don't fall into this particular mindset. This mindset is also can be described as the scarcity mindset, where you see the things that you haven't got versus the things that you have got. And again, most of the population find themselves in that mindset rather than the mindset of abundance. And when we don't have abundance, or we're not kind of seeing that we have abundance within our lives, and I'm not talking about money and materialistic things, I'm talking about, satisfaction in life, as well as some of those maybe materialistic things, but mainly more satisfaction, fulfillment, self-actualization in our potential, then we might find ourselves dropping into this space. And that's when you become a little woe is me. It's not fair. Now, you'll know yourself that you might have even said that from time to time. I certainly have. Can't believe this is happening to me. Why is this happening to me? It's not fair. I don't feel this is appropriate, blah, 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 blah. And actually, that is not helping us from a healthy mindset perspective, from a resilient mindset perspective. Now, some of you might have heard me say this before you came on the same talk last time, but I do want to make reference to that over the last 2 million years, our mind has grown. In fact, it's tripled. So it's 3 times bigger than it was 2 million years ago. Now, that's great because we've got abstract thinking, communication, language, mathematics, creativity, all of the things that we need to survive in this world really, really well and to be productive in this world. But what it's also brought is 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day and 35,000 decisions a day. fact. And so with all of that, we also find ourselves now in much more higher states of alert. And when we're in higher states of alert, it affects our well-being, our mental health, our resilience, stops us from reaching our potential, and finds ourselves sometimes falling into this lovely drama triangle. Now, this is a psychological game that goes on and on and on. Now, you can remain in your own drama, but you can also try and bring people into your drama. And the problem is we then start to lose, as we said, lose sight of what we were in here for in the first instance. Now, sometimes we can catch it before we get into it, because we can become conscious and we can train our brain to understand what's happening to us at particular times. Other times, though, we're going to find ourselves jumping right into it and feeling sorry for ourselves. And once we've done that, it's difficult to get out of it. And that's why we need to think about how we can build our resilience. So we become really consciously aware of not falling into our own drama and bringing other people into it. So we need to look at resilience in 4 ways. So these are the 4 cornerstones of resilience. We have physical resilience, we have mental resilience, emotional resilience, and social resilience. And without these 4 being imbalanced, then again, we can find ourselves wobbling off track, finding ourselves caught up in our drama or somebody else's drama. And it can really, as we said, stop us in our tracks from progressing and moving forward. So let's look at how we can build our resilience. And as Ed said right at the very beginning, resilience is learning how to cope with and recovering from setbacks. Straightforward. It's about facing challenges head on, building emotional regulation, responding, not reacting, developing self-problem solving skills. So really being the solver of your own problems, have loads or heaps of self-compassion, and have a solid support network. So that could be your family, that could be your wider social circle, it could be your colleagues at work, but a good support network will allow you to understand how things are playing out for you, especially if you're receptive to feedback and for inviting people to share what they're observing about what's going on for you in your world at this moment in time. Now, most of us, though, don't like listening to feedback because we immediately think the worst. But resilience is all about opening ourselves up so we can understand what we need to do, where are our weaker gaps, where are the gaps, the things that might stop us from being more resilient. And why is that? Now, we've talked about most people react, not respond. So we can have that mechanism. Now, if we choose in the moment not to blame the situation or the event, we can, in that moment, and it's only a nanosecond, we can make that decision. Do I react or do I respond? And all we need to do is take a pause for breath, and then in that moment, choose how we're going to respond, not react. When we move out of victim mode, we can move into this much more kind of stronger place because we're not feeling like we're overwhelmed. We're not feeling a victim. We change our mindset from I can't do it to I can do it. We change our mindset from I should to I will. And we change our mindset to anything is possible, because anything is possible. So we start to build these more resilient characteristics. We start to build a better communication relationship with ourselves and with others, meaning that we communicate better with ourselves. We think about the language, the words that we describe ourselves. Throughout my life, and when I've had my ups and downs, and there's been many, I've been stupid, silly, ridiculous, not worthy, not good enough. Any of those resonate with you? I've had lots of those kind of phrases and words that I've said about myself. But would you tell your best friend they're not good enough, they're not worthy? Would you tell your best friend that they're silly and they're stupid and they're ridiculous? Of course you wouldn't. So why do you do it to yourself? Or why do we do it to ourselves? So we want to change the words and the language around. We want to stop from being a poor communicator to being a good communicator. We want to have that internal locus of control. Situations, events are going to happen. They are out of our control. What we can only do is control how we respond to the situation or the scenario. That's all we can do. Because whatever's going to play on around us is going to play out anyway. There's nothing we can do about it. But we can change our response and get the control right in terms of how do I want to manage myself in this circumstance situation? How can I lead my life with more emotional intelligence? How can I self-regulate? Meaning, how can I manage my emotions better? Because we all can if we take that step back and take that pause for breath. How do we view ourselves and others? So going from that negative kind of mindset into that much more positive mindset will allow us to see ourselves differently. It means that what you've got to do is you've got to go to the mirror, and instead of thinking, oh my God, I look rubbish today, you need to say, wow, actually your hair's looking good today, or your eyes are bright today. But instead of going to that critical mindset, going to that critical companion, as I call it, that sits and resides within each and every one of us, we move beyond that and we become compassionate instead and kind to ourselves. We have that capacity then to make realistic plans. It doesn't mean to say don't have aspirations and goals. I'm a coach. I would tell everybody to set a big goal. I do that for myself all the time. We must have goals to work to. We need to know where we're heading in life. That's important. But it does mean to say that we still, though, are aware of what's happening in the moment. And it's not to say that we are ignoring the goals, but we cannot be so attached to the outcome because we don't really fully know how the future is going to unfold for us. We can set our compass by setting a goal. We can choose our destination by putting it in the sat nav. But as we know, we always end up taking the scenic route because there'll be traffic jams, there'll be roadblocks, there'll be all sorts of different things in our way. So we need to be realistic about our plans so that we don't set ourselves up to fail, because resilient people don't set themselves up to fail. They set themselves up to be successful. We don't see ourselves as victims and we empower ourselves. Now, no one can empower you apart from you. You are in control of that. And it's just like a light switch. You can just switch it on one day and things will be brighter, rather than kind of keep switching or kind of dimming your light, as I would say. And when we do that, we move into this space of empowerment. We are not looking for drama anymore because we've become self-sufficient. We're solving our own problems, meaning that we become the creator. But we can only become the creator when we have self-awareness and that consciousness of realizing that, whoa, I'm going down that rabbit hole again of drama. I need to pull myself back. And I call this a bit like, it's like sometimes you have to reverse back into yourself. You park in a car and, in a space, sometimes we lose that connection with ourselves. And that's when we can find ourselves falling off the rails and off track and falling into our drama. But if we take a moment and we can reverse back into ourselves, we realize that we have the power of choice. We can make our decisions in the right way and we can solve our own problems. And so instead, what happens is you become a self-compassionate or a compassionate observer of self is another way of describing it, where you start to coach yourself, meaning you're listening much more deeply to yourself and you're figuring out how you can help yourself. And then you move into this place of assertiveness, which is the challenging piece, the challenger piece, where you're not necessarily wanting to be challenged by anybody else. You can challenge yourself. You can say, I'm going to be assertive. I'm going to get my needs met, but I'm going to do it in a way that honors the human spirit. I'm not doing it in an egotistical, arrogant, selfish manner, but I am paying attention to what I need and I will deal with what I need and I will make it happen. Because again, with needs not being met, we can't be resilient. So to do that, we have to have trust in self. And that means a deep trust, meaning that we have trust of our own character. We have trust of our communication. It goes back to that, how we communicate with self and then how we communicate with others. And then we have trust of capability. So we need to manage our expectations, establish boundaries, encourage our intentions of how we want to be, how do we want to show up in this world. Keep agreements, be consistent. We want to trust the communication of what information do I share? How do I present this information? How do I speak my truth and be in my truth? How am I going to be open to give and receive feedback and observations? And how will I maintain to speak with good purpose about self and about others? But it's important that you trust that you have the capability to achieve whatever it is that you need to achieve, because you do have the skills, you do have the attributes, you have your unique gifts and talents. And so when we do that, we can empower ourselves, we can be open, we can be more willing. But trusting self is crucial, it's critical to the success of resilience, because you know you can get there. So to build also on resilience, we need to make sure that we have a good self-care routine. Ritual is very important. I think we can all start off very well by saying we're going to start the week like this, and by the end of the week it could be something different. And so we've got to make sure that, going back to those boundaries, that we make time for us, for ourselves. Topping up your tank regularly is very important. Meditate, exercise, eat well. Good 7, in fact, it's 7.45. So 7 hours, 45 minutes of undisturbed sleep is our absolute optimum sleep time of a night, because overnight our body heals, and that's what we need. Invest in our personal spiritual growth and make sure that you got that balance right between giving and receiving. Most people I know give too much, don't receive an awful lot back. And so get that balance right, because absolutely essential between giving and receiving. Because if you give too much, you're going to be out of balance, or if you take too much, you're going to be out of balance. And again, no good for resilience. So we need to rest. Take a stopgap, stop reacting, break the busyness cycle, because everybody's busy being busy. And again, that's a mindset, right? You can still be busy, but you don't need to be in that busyness cycle all the time, because it makes us be ineffective. It stops us performing to the best of our ability. And it makes us, I would say, quite chaotic if we're busy being busy. So let's rejuvenate, let's replenish, take a moment, because when we do that, we can be more creative, we can be more curious, we can be more resourceful and whole and much more effective in everything that we do. Let's keep ourselves connected. And if you've lost connection, then reconnect. Go back to your core values. What do you love doing? What is your reason for being? Take that time out to reflect. Connect with those, your colleagues. You know, if you're in an environment, working environment, you're most probably going to likely share the same values. Connect with each other and share those values, because that's the kind of an affirmation, an opportunity to really understand what matters to me, what matters to others. When we live in our life where we're connected to our values and we don't lose sight of those values, that means that we can live life more on purpose. And living life more on purpose leads to self-actualization, deeper sense of fulfillment, contentment, happiness, joy, bliss are other words that are kind of come into that category as well, and abundance. And when we protect that space for, I suppose, and then goes back to that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is that alongside that, then we also feel more stable and secure within self. And when you feel secure, safe and stable, then you're grounded. So it's really important to think about how we can reconnect to our true essence, our true core values, to remain grounded and anchored in everything that we do. Now, reframing is, I'm sure you've most probably heard of reframing, but sometimes we don't often do it enough, where we reframe, you know, our thought patterns. We go from that scarcity mindset into that abundant mindset. We move from, you know, those negative narratives or negative thinking patterns from I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, to I am worthy, I am good enough, and I can do this. And so again, our mindset shifts into a different place. Positive mental attitude goes a long way with resilience, but we have to learn how to reframe, because reframing is part of retraining the brain. Because most of us live in perception, not reality. And when we live in perception and not reality, then we find ourselves just making assumptions, judgments, you know, not really understanding if it is our truth or not. But reframing will allow us to understand. And a real simple question to ask is, when you are faced in a moment where your resilience might be challenged, is to ask yourself, what is the reality of this situation, of this circumstance? Rather than going to the emotional side, that because that's the drama, it will draw us in, because as humans, we love to feel that drama because we want people to, you know, feel for us. We want people most probably to feel sorry for us because we're, you know, gosh, we're carrying a heavy load. It's busy. Can't believe this has happened to me. But when we reframe, we say, okay, well, what can I accept about this situation? What can I appreciate about this situation? What affection do I need to give myself right here, right now? And what do I need to pay attention to? And when we do that, we can start to build new neural pathways to the brain, meaning that we start to shift from faulty thinking into more positive thinking, into a mindset that works for us. But because of those 60 to 80,000 thoughts, 35,000 decisions that we make a day, most of us are led and managed by our mind rather than us managing our mind. And so you've got to determine, where do I want to be? Do I want to manage my thoughts so they don't take me into drama and into that unresilient place? Or do I choose to manage my thoughts better so I can remain in that resilient space? And these are the things that I'm going to share with you afterwards on the slide. And these are the things I would like you to maybe reflect upon when faced with challenge or adversity, or just for just a general check-in with yourself. Because reframing is a skill that we all can deal with, and we can all have, and we can deal with better. So always ask yourself, as you said, what do you accept about yourself or your situation? What do you appreciate about yourself or your situation? What affection do you need to give yourself? And what attention do you need to, so what do I need to pay attention to? All that can really help you move more towards that resilience. And I'll share that with you at the end. So action is important in resilience. Affirmative action is important. So we're proactive and deliberate rather than reactive. And that's the key differentiator. We want to amplify and accelerate beyond what's possible, because we can if we wish. It's not about being busy. It's about being more effective. Deliberately looking at ways in order to connect, to achieve goals, to understand the data that our body, mind, and soul is giving us, and others maybe, but also how we can make more of an impact. And we adjust as we're going along, because like anything, every step that you take, you need to adjust and align. Everything is about balance. And so, you know, keep checking in with yourself and keep adjusting and aligning, because with every action, whether that's deliberate or even exploratory, the experience that you're gaining by doing that is gathering critical and crucial information that will help you understand yourself more. It will give you the opportunity to learn and to grow and to continue to evolve in the way that Maslow stated we would. So some signposts of resilience and greater potential is that you're able to speak your truth. You can forgive more easily because you can understand where other people are coming from. You feel secure, safe in the world, anchored in that balance that we talked about, that groundedness. You can see happiness in self rather than looking from external sources. And fear is no longer as persuasive as it used to be. I've got two questions for you to consider beyond this. Is what would happen? So, you know, if I was to ask you to let go of your fear and desire, What would you say your fear is? And what would you say your desires are? And what would happen if you to let go of those fears and desires? Because fear can be very persuasive. It can be very bold in our lives. It can be very in our face. But we can control our fear, because fear at the end of the day just happens in our mind. It doesn't happen anywhere else. And so we can control that if we wish. But to do that, you need to understand what's driving that fear and what's driving those desires. You see the reality of what you've got as this rich field of possibilities, and you're eager to explore that because that curiosity has come back. And you let go of the them versus us thinking we're just all one, we're connected. You don't feel threatened by the unknown. You're quite curious about that. You're quite interested, going back with that kind of childlike curiosity, because you know that the future is born in the unknown and nowhere else. So unfamiliar territory becomes your friend, not your foe. And you can see wisdom in uncertainty. You're okay with not knowing exactly where things are going to end up, but you trust you're on the right path. And then finally, you see being here as its own reward. That is enough for you. These are some signposts for greater potential in related to Maslow, but also in related to our psychological responses as we move more through into building deeper resilience. So this brings me to where I think we need to be, and then I'm going to open up for some Q&A. But what can you do to reach more of your potential so you can live in a resilient life and mindset so that you can flourish? Because our job as human beings is to flourish. That's what we're here for. We're here to flourish, do our best work, to be the best version of ourselves, to make it rewarding and fulfilling. Nobody says our life has to be as hard as it is. Don't get me wrong, life happens and there are lots and lots of challenges that we experience throughout our lives. But if we change our mindset, if we retrain the brain, if we learn just to take a moment to pause, take 3 deep breaths, observe what's happening to us in this moment, and then proceed with a greater sense of awareness, then all we're doing is building that stronger sense of self, stronger resilience, and we're able to find that deeper sense of connection with ourselves. And that is what being resilient is all about, and that's why it is so important. So, do we have any questions?
Thank you so much, Gillian. That was brilliant. We have had a couple of questions, but I think from my side to start off with, it was really interesting fact with the percentage of people who look at now, the present, compared to those who look at the past and the future. And actually that was some staggering differences in the percentage. One of the questions we've had come through, and I know it's something that you spoke sort of in the middle of your presentation, is that how we are resilient when gaining feedback. And obviously some people would deem criticism and feedback as quite a close line. So how do you then approach that from a resilient perspective, and how do you then view each of those differently?
Lovely question. Thank you. So for me, the way that I see feedback, and it might sound a bit cheesy, but feedback to me is a gift. Okay. Now, when we are in our ego state, feedback is our nemesis, right? It's the evil, bad thing. And we get panicked about feedback because we immediately think it's going to be the worst. And so what happens is our defenses come up. We pull the shutters down. And as human beings, we only hear what we want to hear. Now, if you look at feedback as an opportunity to develop and grow, whether it's good feedback or maybe not so good feedback, it's still an opportunity to listen and to hear what somebody else has got to say about you or your work or whatever it might be. Now, if we're willing to open our, kind of really be open and receptive to that, then we can choose what we then decide to do with that gift of feedback. We all get presents at Christmas time and things like that for birthdays that we might unwrap and go, wow, this is amazing. I'm going to put it on. I'm going to own it. It's absolutely right for me. And then there are other gifts that you might get throughout your life that you think, actually, do they really know me? Is this really going to suit me? And you might then put it to one side. You might give it away. You might throw it away. And it's the same with feedback. Just because somebody gives you feedback doesn't mean to say that you have to do something about it. But what you have to do is really listen with open ears and an open heart. Because if you're closed off, all you'll hear is the negative. You won't see that there is a possibility there to grow and learn. And so what you can decide then, after you've listened to it with an open mind and open heart, then you can decide, well, what do I choose to do with this? Do I own it? Do I take it on? Does it fit with, does it resonate? And if it doesn't, then thank them and say, well, thank you very much for that feedback. I'll take that away and think about it. But it doesn't mean to say that you have to do something about it. And that's the whole point of being resilient. You become assertive. You choose in that moment, is this me? And can I do something with this? Or